Hello, this is the second part of the HTML CSS class. In the first part, I introduced to you what HTML is and what we can use it for. HTML by itself means or stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's mainly responsible for the structure of the content that we put on our website. So by using HTML, we are able to structure all information that we put on the website. Now, during this phase, during the first lecture, which is the HTML, we learned about the basic elements of HTML, which included a head tag, the strong elements, how to also create an ordered list and ordered list, how to insert an image into an HTML document, how to create a table, and we talked about the most important thing, which is forms, which serves as the basis of getting information from users. Now, I introduced to you the inputs, the form elements called inputs, which has different types. The first one was the input type text. There are other ones that are passwords, email, the select elements that falls in forms, how to create a text area, how to come out with a radio button, and so on and so forth. Now, these ones are, as I said, forms the basis for getting information from users online. Now, all these were created by using HTML elements or tags in one way or the other. By way of reiterating, HTML is meant for structuring the content that we put on our web page. Now, let's get to the second part of the HTML CSS lecture. In the second part, I'm going to introduce to you what CSS is. CSS in itself stands for Cascading Style Sheet. Then, in fact, the main purpose of CSS is to customize the appearance of the content that we put on the site. So CSS can help us decorate every element that we have on our page. In fact, every element that is in HTML, we can append some sort of CSS style to it. So what we're going to do is we do this by adding the style attributes to the HTML elements that we have. That every element in HTML can be styled. How can we style it? Excuse me. We can style it by introducing an attribute, HTML attributes called style. The style will take up the its own value. The value usually are the properties of the styles that we're going to add to that particular element. So in that case, we can change the style by altering the CSS property of that particular element. An example of a CSS property together with its value is the color attribute, the color property. And another one is the text align um, property. So in that case, we can text align any text that we have on our page. Now let's start with the various types that exist. There are three main ways that we can style our CSS element. Sorry, there are three main ways that we can style our HTML elements. The first way is what we term as the inline styling. So by inline styling, the only thing you do is to put in a styles attribute and put in the values in there. Let's take a typical example. Now from here, we can see the heading, the H1 element is black, and virtually all the content that we have on the page is black. So what can we do to make it, to give it some sort of color? That is where the inline styling does come in. So we can go to, I'm going back again to the VS Code. By the way, these contents we have in here are what's produced the content that we see in the browser. So let me quickly display that on the page. So we have the contents. Yes. So let me display the content that we have in here are the ones that provided or that produce the content we have on this website. So these are the things that we've done so far. There are more that I expect you to go through and learn. All right. So quickly, I'm going to style this particular H1 tag or H1 element by using the inline styling method. So first of all, I'll move on to the VS Code, which is shown here. Now I'll locate what we have here as the H1. This is the H1 heading one that we see on the page. It's black. I would want to give it a color of maybe red and possibly center the alignment of this particular heading one text. So in doing that, first of all, go into the H1 element, then type the attribute style, and within it, I'm going to put in the property and also the value for that particular attribute. So this time around, I would want to change the color of the heading by giving it a color like red. Then I also want to give it another attribute called text align, just to help align the text that we have. Now, anytime I start typing the property, you could see there is a drop down that comes in, and it also gives me the option to choose any of the values that is in there. So I have the text align, which can take center and justify and so on and so forth. But for the purposes of this, I would just want to center the text that will be put on the page. So I'll save this one, go back again to the browser, and refresh the page to see what happens to the heading tag. You can see I've been able to style the heading element, the H1 element, which is heading 1, with the color red, and also centered that particular text. So this is one way of creating or styling elements of HTML or styling HTML elements. And we call it the inline styling. Now there is a second one, but before I talk about it, I would want to duplicate this information that we have in here. So I'll hold down the Shift key. Once I'm at the back, Shift Alt, then the arrow key to produce a copy of what I have in here. Now I also want to create, assuming I have another H1 that I want to, give the same color to. It means virtually every text that I want to put on the page, assuming this is another heading one. So I have two heading ones, and I want to style them. It means for every heading one, I will have to copy each one and put it in one by one. And of course, assuming I want to start this one too as well with the same information, I have to copy the entire thing here and place it here. That makes it a little difficult. But first of all, let me save this one and display how the content looks like on the page. I'll refresh it, then you can see I have another text in here holding with the H1 element and also being styled. Now, this is an inline way of styling. There is another option which we term as the internal styling. The internal styling, instead of having to style the same element over and over again with the same property, styles property, we can just call the name of the element, then apply the property to that particular element. That is what makes it internal. It is internal because we create what we call a style element, and within it we put in the HTML element that we want to style. So how do we do that? What I'm going to do is to undo all these. Sorry, let me just maintain this and clean the styles that I have for this particular property. I'll clean this one and I'll clean this one as well. So in creating an internal style sheet, what we can do is I'll come to the bottom over here. The styles would have to reside inside the head tag that you see in here. You have to put in the style over here. Now come into the head tag, then type the element style. Of course, VS Code opens the page, opens the tag, and also closes it for me. And within it this time round, I'm going to style the H1 element. So I'll begin by typing H1, and within it, I would now open the curly braces and put in the the properties of the style for that particular H1 in here. For the for the previous example we gave a property of color, and the color that we used was red. Then we also added another HTML property called text align, and we gave it a value of center. So when I save this, you can see this is H1. This will apply to all H1s that are in this particular document. So going back again, if I expect to see the same thing if I refresh the page. So let's refresh the page. You can see I have the same thing in there. So H1, the heading one is given the style that I gave. The second heading that I also created also has the same thing. And there is also another H1 element on the page. Going back again, you can see these are the three H1 elements that are available in this HTML document. And all of them have been applied with the CSS property over here. So this is an inline way of styling. Now there is a third one that I'm going to talk about, which is the external CSS. So please bear in mind that there are three main ways of styling: inline styling, internal styling, and also the external styling. All right. Okay, so far we've been able to talk about the inline styling, the internal styling. Now let's talk about external way of styling. But before that, be mindful that for assuming we have an inline styling for maybe the body, we create one for the body. It means all the content that we have here is going to take advantage, is going to, the styling for this particular element here would apply to the content that we have in here. So be mindful of what you style at any point in time. Okay, so now let's talk about the third way of styling, which is the external styling. So that is the another way of styling. So we use the link elements, which we will place in the head tag or the head element with a link to a CSS file that contains some styling. So this means the HTML file would look something similar to what I'm going to show you. So this is for internal styling. So for external styling, we first of all begin by creating a file called, it could be any name. We could use a file called style.css. So when we created HTML elements, we used the file extension for all HTML document was .html. So in CSS2, it also has a file extension of .css. But personally, I always find ways to organize the files that I have in my document. So I would want to place all CSS files in a folder called CSS and all images in a folder called image folder or IMG folder. So I'll create a folder by clicking on this and type in here CSS. Now you can see by order of hierarchy, you can see CSS is found in there. That is not where I want to place it. So I'll bring it out like this by moving it. So you can see I have a folder called CSS. I have a folder called IMG. And all these are in the same level with each other. The index.html and the page.html. They are all found in the same level. Of course, the image we have in here is not on the same level as these. So in the same way, I would want to create a file in here that is going to be called CSS. So first of all, before I can do that, select the folder, then I'll click on new file. Within it, I'm going to type the name of the file, which is going to be styles.css. So you can see automatically I have the styles.css being created for me that has no information in there. So this particular file is inside the CSS. It's a way I organize my files just to make things easier. Now, talking about the third way of incorporating styles to your HTML documents, we have been working on the page documents. So what we can do is, instead of creating style over here, still in the same head tag, we can start by typing what we called link. So we put in the link attributes, and by default, you can see it's populated some Visual Studio has been able to populate this information for us. So the link, which has a relation to a style sheet and an href, the href is going to give us the location where we can find the style that we want to, give our to apply to our CSS. And that is found in a folder called CSS. And because I'm in the page.html folder, which is found here, I can, first of all, will have to call this folder before I can call this particular file. So I'll begin by typing CSS, as you can see in here, and within that, I can now call the style.css. So you can see I've been able to create this particular file in here. Now, the link element is also a singleton tag. I spoke about what singleton tags are. These are tags that close by themselves. And of course, as the T also talked to you about, these are also block elements. So that is how these are not block elements. Yeah, I think that is what was told. So you should be aware of that. So installing it, we first of all will have to link the CSS, create a link element in our HTML document and link it into the CSS. So we don't need to type the style element that we have in here, but rather I'm going to copy the content that I have in the styles, then delete all that I have in here in the styles elements. Then when I go back again to the styles.css page, I can now paste what I want to show. So in there, in the styles.css, I only want to style the the H1 element with a color red and also a text align of center. Now let's go back again to our web browser. Let's try and refresh the page and see we have not, whatever we did has not changed. So that is the third way of styling. but there are reasons, and there are reasons why you should always try to stick to this approach of styling whenever you want to style your HTML documents. That is the external styling. And the reason is there might be times when you might have so many of these HTML documents that you would want to style. So the moment you have just the link element in here, linking to the right CSS, you don't have to go in there and create the style one by one, but rather you just move to the styles, the style.css, and do all your styling in that particular folder. Now you realize I've given you an assignment on the VLE. Towards the end of this, I will explain that so that you take your time and do the assignment. All right, so that is about the third way of styling. All right, so now that we have all the three ways of styling our HTML documents, I would want to talk about some other properties that exist. So there are far too many CSS properties that are available, but we would like to just apply some basic ones to the content that we have on the page, on this particular page. So we want to just apply some basic HTML to the content that we have in here. So remember that any element in the HTML document can be styled. And as I said, there are so many ways of doing this. So I would want to talk briefly about some common ones that we normally use. The first one, which you already know, is the color. Is the color property. The next one is the text align. Now there is another one which we normally call the background color. So for instance, on our website, assuming we want the entire page to have a background color of, let's say, yellow or maybe black, whichever color that we know of. What we can do is we would have to, of course, which element do you think will be the best elements to help to target to be able to make the entire background of this particular web page look black? Of course, as you guess right, the element is the body element. So we can do that by going to the HTML document, the HTML document that we have in VS Code. Is this particular element that we want to target and give it a background color of maybe yellow, green, whichever color that we want. And since we are advised to use the external style sheet, the external way of styling our HTML documents, we'll just have our link in here. We go into our CSS. This time around, it is the body element that we want to style. So by way of organization or organizing the styling for each of them, we always leave a space in here. Of course, you can continue with it, but when you organize it this way, it looks very nice. So the body element that I want to organize. So I would start by typing body. Then within it, I'm going to type in, let me just do it this way. So the alignment is in place. So I have perfect alignment. So within it, I want to give it a background color of, let's say, yellow. I think yellow is more appropriate. So when I save this, this tells me that I want to style this element, which is the body element in HTML, and I want the background property to apply to that particular element. And the background property is supposed to do exactly as said. So when we refresh the page, you can see the entire web page has a background color of yellow. So that is how I think it's a little piercing to the eye to read. So let me see if I can change and use a different color. Now, since this has already been opened, there are so many ways that you can do this. Of course, you can specify by just typing the name of the color, or you can go the combination of the RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue. That is one other way. We also have another way, which is the use of the hexadecimal approach, which is the hash. And the hashes the hashing of the colors, we normally have 6 numbers coming in. Now, in multimedia systems and design, you were told that um, when you have something like this, so for instance, we have 3 colors, so they all fall within RGB, red, green, and blue. So that tells you that the first two, so if we want, we have 00 and let's say FF and also 00, that tells you the color that we're looking for is going to be green because it's the green that is on. There are times we might not use 6, but we can also use 3. And that is also the same way. So it means the middle one, if you want green, it has to be F. So that will also change and we'll have the color F. So there are different ways of styling the giving colors to our HTML property element with the right CSS property. So I'll still maintain and use a different color. Let's say this. All right. Okay, please be mindful that anytime we have the property together with the value, we end it with a semicolon, as you can see from all of these sides. So I can save the page here, go back again, refresh the page, and the color changes to something a little lighter or dimmer. So we also have another one, which is width. So the width is always in pixels or percentage of a page. So that is also another property of CSS. We have the height, it is also in pixels or percentage of a page. We have the padding, and that displays how much space should be left inside an element. So once we have an element and we talk about the padding property for CSS, it means we want to know how much space should be left inside that particular element. Those times, our gentlemen and even our ladies, you realize that some of our coats, our jackets, have something we call a pad. The pad usually is inside the dress. Those that wear kaba and slate, I don't know if it's still being used. You will realize there is some sort of the seamstress or the tailors have some pad put in just to raise, maybe your shoulder or put it in line. So padding has got to do with inside spacing between for that particular element. And we have another one which we call the margin. So the margin is how much space should be left outside an element. So the margin has got to do with the space that we will put up outside an element. The padding is the space which should be left inside an element. Now we also have another property called font family. So that tells you the type of font for the text that we put on the page. All right, you can see here by default, we have this particular font in here. Assuming we go back again to our page and we change the font, maybe we want to apply it to the entire document, so the entire body. So we can have the font family, the font family property being applied to the entire document. So we could change it to it. These are examples of fonts. You can use Vedana, Geneva, Tahoma, and so on. So usually by order, it means when it sees we want to apply Vedana to the entire body, any text that is contained in the body of the HTML element. So it will first of all, the browser will first of all apply Vedana. If Vedana font is not available, then it will move on to the next font, and so on and so forth. So that is how fonts are usually applied. But the good thing is most of our current browsers have all these things in them. So when I save the page and I refresh, you should see the font style changing. You can see it has applied the Vedana way font style. Of course, once we've been able to talk about font family, which displays the fonts that we have, we can also talk about font style, font size. So in the same way, we can also possibly have a special font size for maybe our H1 element. In that case, I can have the font size property, and for that, I can either give it, put it in pixels or in percentage, whichever way. So we can make it, let's say, 70 px pixels. So as I type 70, you can see these are all other options that could be used. So I'm using 70 pixels. So it means all my H1 elements is going to have a font size of 70. See how big it's displayed right now. By default, because we're not using the font size, it's maintained and use the default font size for our H1 element. In CSS, a way to um, a way to be able to comment is by the use of / at and closing with the star / So it is / star and the comments that we want to put in there. In HTML, remember we could write comments by just um, selecting wherever we want to comment and holding down the control and / and that's that for us. That is one way. Or so when we do that, it fills it up for us. In CSS, we can only do that by using this way to comment. So of the font size, of course, you can have a border also displayed. So let's try the border for maybe this particular font. So let's say H1, we can place a border around it. We can have a border maybe taking up, let's say 2 pixels. Then we can add a property like maybe dashed. So it's going to dash our font element, our border for the H1. Remember, the H1 is a block element. So you can see this as a block. It's put a dashed border around it. And you can see we have this in here. So the whole of this has been given a border. The H1 element is a block element, so we're able to have the dash filling out the space. Of course, you can also reduce the size in terms of width by giving it the width property. So let's try and put up a width property around it and let's see how it's going to be. So I'll go back again and I give it a width property. How wide should it be? We could say maybe 200 pixels. So that is the width. When we go back again and refresh the page, you can see the information that we have here. In fact, the heading has been put in 200 pixels. And of course, the content we have in there has still been centered. Please don't forget, from over here, we said all H1s should be centered, irrespective of where it falls. Here is the case, we're giving it a width of 200. So even the content that we have in there still should be centered. If we give it 500, save and go back again and refresh it, I think this one you get to see that indeed it has been centered. So that is how to use that. Of course, once we have width, it means we can have height. So we can also put in what we call height for this. The height could be, you can also give it a some sort of, let's say 100 pixels. And that could also be another property that we can add to our page. So we can see we have the height given to us by this. So the border itself is there, and the height of that particular each one element is what has been displayed in here. I'm not really conversant. I don't really like the width, so I'm still the height. So I'm going to maintain the original that I already have. So I'll comment out these. So that is so these are some of the basic properties and values that we can give our elements or HTML elements that we see. Now, let us also try and use some of what we have just learned to improve on the table that we created in previous class. So on the table, going back again to this particular page, you remember this is the table that we created. Going to the browser, scrolling down, you realize that this is the table that we created. I remember saying when we use CSS, I'll explain a little further. Now the table, we give it an attribute of border with 1 pixel. But this time around, I would want us to remove it and style the table itself with CSS. So I'll maintain this, go back again, refresh the page, and you realize the table does not have any border, and so on and so forth. We're going to style this with CSS. So what can we do? I would want us to, you can see how the above, what we have in here, looks exactly how it looks so plain. So we're going to add the style tag to it and link it with an external style sheet which we already have. Put in some of these properties. So first of all, in the HTML document, we have table. In there too, we have table head, we have th, we have table body, and we have tr and td, which is the table data, table row, table data. So as I said, CSS can target respective elements in the HTML document. So first of all, let's try and target the table itself by giving it a border and also maybe a border. Let's see how it goes. So we move on to our style sheet. Then we target the element table. Then for the table elements, then we're going to give it a border. Instead of you doing it in the HTML, give it a border of, let's say, 1 pixel, 1 px, and we give it an outline which is solid, because we can get, there are so many of them. So we're using a solid outline of black. So saving this one and going back again to the page and refreshing it, you can see now we have some sort of outline for this particular table. So we have an outline or a border around the table. But there is one other thing, or there are some few other things that you realize in here. You know, the table is made up of table data and table head and so on and so forth. What can we do? we can either target the respective rows so that it touches only the row, so that the CSS target touches only the rows and touches only the rows and give it a border of possibly 1 pixel, which is solid and probably black. But you can see if we go the tangent of giving each of the data cell a body of solid 1 pixel, which is black, it affects the entire table. So it will be appropriate to rather target the table data instead of having to do it one by one for the table row. So I'll go back again, then create this time round table data, which is TD, put in the same thing with this border. Then I give it 1 pixel solid, of course, black. Of course, we can, the values that we have in there, we can have as many as possible in there. So solid black. When I save, go back again to the browser, refreshing the page, and see we have the table data picking up the border for each of them. Now, you realize that, of course, we don't have that for the, the table head or the TH. So what we can do is, let's target the TH itself. Please don't forget, we are targeting the TH because these are more like the table data for this one. That is why we are targeting those ones. So we can have another one called TH. TH, targeting the table head, the TH, that is the title of the page. And in there, we will have order. Then we're putting in a pixel, 1 pixel of solid, and also black. All right, so when we save this one and go back again and refresh the page, we should have the TH also having a border and so on and so forth. So we've been able to put our page, our table in this beautiful layout. And now we kind of see two lines in here. This is mainly because we have not been able to collapse the border itself. So there is a property in CSS that says that is by name border collapse, and it takes the value of collapse. That collapse and close up all those gaps that you see in here. So we can put that particular property inside the table, the table that we have in here. So we call it. We'll start by typing table, border. Of course, IntelliSense will give us more options. So we have border collapse. And it takes up the property collapse. So I'll just select this one. When I save this and go back again and refresh the page, we should see all the spaces that we had in there vanishing. So that is a way of collapsing the table. Of course, we can also increase the size of the table, the width of the table itself, by using the property width. By using the property width, and we can give it, we can say it should take about, let's say, 50% of the page. So when we use 50% and save and go back again, refreshing it, it should take about 50% of the entire page that we see here. Of course, we can also save it in pixels by typing, let's say, 500 pixels. Save this, go back again, refresh the page, and we have all these, in there. Now, looking at this one, it tells us that we can also have a way to align the element that we have in our table data so that it becomes, it falls in the middle. And that is also possible. So by using text align center. In fact, you can explore and do so many of these things. I'm going to also um, go back again and use the percentage instead of the pixel. So I have this one, refreshing the page, that's this. But there are so many of these properties that exist, and this these are some few ones that we've talked about. Now, still on the table, let's go back again to the CSS of the table. Um, so on the CSS of the table, you can see we have border here, and virtually the information we have here is here, here, and also here. That looks more like plenty repetitions, which is not the best way of doing things. So there is something we can also do. But before that, I would want us to also incorporate the padding property. I spoke to you about the padding, which is responsible for the space that we leave the element inside, the space that we leave inside for that particular element. So when we use pattern, and you can see we have pattern left, pattern top, pattern bottom, pattern right. So when we start with left, top, bottom, right. But the moment you just use pattern and you specify, let's say the pattern is going to be, let's say 2 pixels, like this, then it means automatically this particular pattern is picking all the 4 sizes, the left, the top, the bottom left. It's picking all of them. If you want to write it in for the respective one, you can have pattern left, pattern right, pattern top, instead of just typing pattern. But when you type pattern, this applies to all the patterns that is available, left, right, bottom, and also top. So we'll add the pattern, pattern of 2 pixels for both the table data and the T head. So I'll still type pattern and give it 2 pixels. So if we refresh the table itself, we should see some more spacing coming at the beginning inside. The pattern is inside the element, and the CSS is also targeting the table head and whatever, and the table data. So when we pad it, so we mean to say from here to here, we should have 2 pixels, and so on and so forth. But the for here, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and 2 pixels inside this particular element. So let's refresh the page. You can see we've been able to have 2 pixels circulating. Maybe if you don't see it well, I can change it to um, let's say 12 pixels. So you can appreciate it even better. So going back again and refreshing it, you can see we have 12 pixels from here to here, 12, 12, 12, and 12 before whatever content comes in. From here to here is 12. So the text will fill from here to here and leave the remaining over here. Going back again, I'm going to reduce it to 2. Now, as I said, you realize that we have so many of these things replicating, especially this and this is the same as this and this. So instead of having to write this all over again for a different HTML element, what we can do is to use what we call comma, sorry, is to put that comma here, a separator, and the comma, and adding th in here. So it means this CSS property is that going to touch on the TD and the TH element. Then we can delete this one. No need to type this. So going back again and refreshing the page with a pixel of 2, and with a pattern of 2, we should see exactly the same as what we already know. So that is how we can group some of these elements, especially when they have the same properties for styling. Well, so far we've had a good introduction into what CSS selectors are. Um, Now, when we talk of CSS selectors, the selectors that are patterns, CSS selectors actually are selectors. These type of selectors are actually patterns which are used to select elements that you want to style. So there are lots of them that are available. So always have in mind that in CSS, selectors are patterns which we use to select the type of elements we want to style. Now, there are many ways to determine which HTML elements you are styling, some of which we will mention we mentioned now. The good thing is we've already started, using some of them. The first one is the element type. So that is also what we mean by the CSS selectors. We've been selecting, going through ways to select the elements we want to style by using the element type. So this is what we have been doing so far. In this case, what we've been doing is styling all the elements of the same type. Now, there is another way to do that, but there are more ways that we can do this. But for the purposes of this CSS class, we're going to introduce to you two more CSS selectors, which is apart from the elements type, selecting using the element type. There is another one we call the ID, and also another called the class. Now, the ID option is to give your HTML elements an ID, like maybe assuming you have H1, you give it an ID, possibly maybe first header or and so on and so forth. And then by applying this particular styling, we can call this particular the ID in the CSS file, and then apply the CSS property to it. You should be mindful that the moment you declare an ID on an HTML document, you cannot use the same ID inside the same HTML document. So ID, in this case, it's unique for each page. So how do we do that? Let's go back again to our HTML elements. So now I will want us to create an ID for the, let's say, H6 element, which we have in here. So it's also another way to style our HTML elements on the HTML documents or the page itself is by the introduction of the selector by name ID. So we can start by typing in, beginning with the attribute ID and giving it any name that we want. But there are as many as possible IDs that we can use. So assuming we want this ID, it has a property, the property is ID, or the attribute is ID, and it's taking a value which we can say maybe first heading, let's say last heading. So it means we've created an ID which we are going to call on in CSS to style our H6 elements. Irrespective of where it is, of course, we can use the same ID and put it in a different HTML element, but we can use it only once on the HTML page. You can't have the same ID displaying on the page, on the same page. So we want to now target this particular ID and call it through CSS and apply the styling to it. So how do we do that? So this is the last thing. The ID is called the last header. Let's make it our last header just to make it. Of course, it's the last header for H1, which is H6. So if we want to apply it to um, apply the CSS to the ID, what we do is we come to CSS by way of the generic way that we've been treating this was the element type. We'll have just typed H6 and now started with giving it the property. But this time round, we've already created an ID that we want to call that particular ID and apply CSS on that particular ID. So we do that by starting with the hashtag. So hash, others would say sharp, like C sharp. Others would say, I think, yeah, let's maintain what we have here. So we use the hashtag. Then anytime you are creating an ID in CSS, you use a hashtag. So hashtag and the name of the ID. This time around, it is what? Last. We call it last header. Then within it, we can now put in properties. So we can start with the, let's say, font size. We want to give it a special font size of, let's say, you can select XSL and so on and so forth. But I choose to use maybe 23 or 32 pixels. Of course, we can give it a different color, so we can use a color. Possibly we can say blue. So now you can see we didn't call the elements to apply to the H6 elements. Rather, we call the ID. So wherever the ID is, irrespective of the elements that is being applied to, we can call that element and apply this particular styles. When I save this, I go back again to the browser. And I refresh the page. I expect to see heading 6 changing. You can see heading 6 has changed. Now has a font of size 32. Of course, we can reduce it. Maybe 32 is too big. We can reduce it to possibly, let's say 24 or something. There's something I will talk to you about. So going back again and refreshing the page, you can see the font size has reduced a little. So we were able to use this. We can use CSS to style IDs. Now, as I said, the ID gives the option to our ATL elements so that we can call it, and we should be mindful that can only apply it in CSS. We can apply it in CSS by using the hashtag to show to show that we are using or searching for an ID. Now that is one way. And remember, you can't have two elements having the same ID, and no element can have more than one ID. Remember again, I'll just repeating again. You can't have the same elements on the same page, and you can't have more than one element holding the different IDs. The ID can only apply to one particular element. So no two elements can have the same ID, and no element can have more than one ID. So that is one way of doing this. In a situation where we want to apply maybe a class. So this is also similar to the ID. But a class can be shared by more than one element. And a single element can have more than one class. We add a class to an HTML element in a way that I'm going to show you in here. So assuming we have an element, maybe the UL element, and I want to put up something to create a class for it. So I can target that particular class and apply CSS properties to. So I'll just go into the HTML element for the UL. Then I start with the attribute class, and within it, I can give it a class name. It could be any name. So we can say page, let's say page text. Um, yeah, let's say order. This is unordered. We can just say unordered. So we now have one class. Of course, we can also have multiple classes applying to it. We can say maybe it being unordered, we could have maybe and also add another thing to it, like maybe muted also. Muted can also be another class. In fact, we can have so many classes in there. We separate it by creating them one by one with a space in between them. So of course, when I go back again to the CSS, the CSS page we have here, I can call the class by using the dot and calling the name of the class. So for classes, you can call it by using dots in CSS. So let's say I called this one unordered, unordered. Let me be sure how I typed it. Unordered. Okay, so I have the class name called unordered. Of course, I can target that particular class, giving it any font or any color. So maybe I can give it a color of, let's say, um, blue, violet. Let's say this. So this will apply to the unordered list and give it the color blue, violet. So this is the unordered list. Of course, the LIs are inside the unordered. That's how come we're able to see this. So going back again, we can also apply the same unordered to another to the ordered list by just calling that particular class. So I can call it class. Then I call it maybe unordered. In actual fact, it to be ordered. So when I save it, because I'm applying the same class, classes can be applied to so many elements as possible, but IDs can only be applied to one element at a time. One element. And that element can only hold just one ID. On the page, it's just only one ID that you can have. But for classes, you can use classes to you can display classes on so many elements. So you can see the same class has been applied to the ordered list. So that is how classes also work. Of course, we created another one called muted. So we have the ordered class on ordered class here and also here, but we don't have the muted class. So we can create another class and call it muted by using the dot by using dots, and that also works. If you look closely up here, you can see we have the muted class, we have the ordered class, and we have the UL class. So that is how it's really been organized. And over here we have just the unordered applying to the OL class. So that is where what is telling us the location to apply it. Now, we also have to deal with the problem of potential conflicting in CSS, especially when assuming now we have a background color um, for our body inside the CSS to be this color, Alice blue. What happens when the header or the background color should be changed to to be red based on its class, but blue based on its ID? CSS has something we call specificity. That is a specific order needs that needs to be followed. So there are times you can have an inline styling, you can have an ID, you can have the class itself, and you can also have the element itself in your styling. CSS has the specificity order, and it goes in the order that I just spoke to you of. So whenever we have any of our elements, um, probably taking up one particular class, and that same element also picking up another ID. By CSS specificity, we select the order of um, properties for the CSS that will apply to that particular element is in the order of inline styling. That is the first thing that will take preference. So if you have the entire body of our HTML document to hold a font family of Vedana, and maybe you're saying the entire body is holding Vedana, and we have maybe the the font, maybe the H1 to hold, let's say, let's say, um, if you are using inline, and we're going to use this one. Let's say the color, let's say the font family is not Vedana, but we're going to probably use, let's say, Lucinda, stuff like that. Of course, which one is going to display? So refreshing the page, you can see by default, the body is changing all the text on the page to Vedana. But because we went in to the HTML element itself, H1, HTML document, and applied the style as an inline styling, this takes um, precedence over the others. So that is how come when we go back again to the page, you can see the color of the heading is taken as the first that is applied, irrespective of what the body is doing. So you should be mindful that whenever we have some of these styling conflicting in CSS, always there is an order that will follow. And that is what we normally term as the HTML CSS specificity. So in that, we have the inline styling being the first order before we come to the ID, before the CSS, before we talk, sorry, before the class, before we come to the element type. Inline styling is always at the first position, the ID second, the class third, and the element type fourth. So that is the order of preference when the styling is happening. So in addition to the comma for multiple selectors, which I've talked about, there are several ways to also specify which element you would like to style. Now, in the handout, there is a list of tables um, that is going to go through some of these few examples. So I already talked about if you have um, so many of these elements or classes or selectors having the same property, you can just group them by separating it with comma. That is A, comma B. Now, in the handouts, I would want you to go through it and make sure you understand it very well. We also have descendant selectors, of course, as the name says, descendant selectors. I would also put it in the slide. I would want you to go through it and understand it very well. All right, so this brings us to the end of the use of CSS. The handout is on the VLE and it contains HTML and CSS. There are some few things I would want you to go through and try and practice. But those are very important. Make sure you understand them before we have our next quiz. Now on the VLE, maybe I will put up a video to explain the assignment that I have in there. All right, so this brings us to the end of HTML and CSS lecture. Handout, as I said, make sure you go through it. If you have any question, let's discuss it in class, or you can also contact the TA. But personally, I prefer you put up your questions in the forum of the course that's of this particular course, which is web programming. You put up your question in there. Anybody can answer such questions in the forum. Thank you very much. Of course, anybody who put up questions and is being answered by anybody, I'll have a special mark for that student. So please let's put up questions in the forum and let's all of us, learn from each other. I've seen some questions in the forum and I applaud those gentlemen who have been putting up such questions and also solving questions that pertains to some basic stuff or errors that you've been getting in the installation of SAM. Kudos to that gentleman. That is a good job done. All right, so I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you very much.